wants to work. Okay, perfect. That works. So I work, as I told you, nowadays at CERTH. CERTH stands for the Center for Research and Technology Hellas. Its headquarters are located in Thessaloniki, in Greece, in the northern part of Greece, but it has different departments in different cities. It's a very big research center. It has 5 institutes and more than 1,500 employees. Among them, more than 260 are experienced researchers. And our budget comes mainly from European and national research projects, which is, as you all know, quite competitive. We're happy to be the first in success rates in Horizon Europe proposals and also 14th in the whole Europe, which are quite nice numbers. We also have budget coming from industrial contracts and a fairly low, let's say, percentage that comes from state funding. The 5 institutes of CERTH are the Information Technologies Institute, the Hellenic Institute of Transport, the Institute for Bioeconomy and Agri-Technology, the Institute of Applied Biosciences, and our institute, which is SPERI, the Chemical Process and Energy Resources Institute. SPERI is one of the oldest institutes inside CERTH. So it was founded just before CERTH was founded, to be honest, in 1985. So it has more than 35 years experience. Our director is Dr. Foutetakis, and the main research areas of SPERI is clean energy, climate and environment, sustainable development, bioengineering and biomedicine. I input here some key figures and facts about SPERI. I think an important part is that we have equipment that it's worth more than 200 million euros, and I believe that we have very good infrastructure to do R&D in all these research areas. SPERI is structured in different laboratories. My laboratory is Artemis Laboratory, the Advanced Renewable Technologies and Environmental Materials and Integrated Systems. It is led by our director, Dr. Kourtzanidis, George, and it has been founded quite recently, but it arises from a merge of different research teams, so have a long experience and also quite a good infrastructure and a multitude of scientific directions ranging from porous and microstructural materials, from emissions controls, etc., to concepts of solar-driven thermal and thermochemical applications, CO2 capture with membrane, lithium-ion batteries, hydrogen technologies, etc., and also the Plasma Science and Innovation Research Team, which is a quite recent research team inside CERTH as a whole. In our research team, we are focusing on non-thermal plasma science, especially on atmospheric pressure discharges. So we are interested in plasma science and plasma engineering towards both fundamental understanding, but also development of technologies. And we do this by using state-of-the-art numerical modeling and also experimental plasma process development with diagnostics. Our main key focus application areas, at least to that point, are plasma-based chemical process liquefaction, gas conversion and plasma-liquid interactions, plasma-assisted combustion and electrohydrodynamic phenomena, materials processing with plasmas, and modeling of plasma wave interactions. As I told you, we are quite a recent research group. I'm quite happy, though, that already we have both experimental and numerical capabilities. These are some of the equipment that we have in our lab. And diagnostics, of course, we leverage also the very, very long experience and expertise of different groups inside CERTH. For us, synergies are a key aspect for success. I will not go into details on that. I will just move into the modeling equipment, if you want, or capabilities. This is the focus of the seminar anyhow. For us, modeling is an integral part of the developments in the plasma science world. So we like to have both house-built solvers and also a lot of experience in commercial softwares. I'll just put attention here to this Copayet solver, which is a solver that I have been co-developing for the past 10 or 15 years, along with colleagues from ONERA, from Toulouse. And it's a house-built, self-consistent, multi-species and multi-temperature plasma fluid solver. It has a lot of nice capabilities, unstructured and structured mesh support. We can model any kind of chemistry, a lot of different schemes for time integration, for special integration, etc. I've also developed a quasi-neutral high-frequency wave plasma solver. We'll see some examples anyhow later for all this. Of course, we have experience in COMSOL multiphysics and in open source codes, especially OpenFOAM for multiphysical simulations. And I think the most important part is that we have expertise and a lot of experience in tuning and interpreting multi-physical plasma simulation results, which is not a given, and it's very important for plasma modeling. And we have also some high-performance computing infrastructure for parallel computing. A few words about some of our ongoing funding projects. These are all funded by the European Union. I will not spend a lot of time on that. I just want to emphasize on the first project, which is called caipirinha. It's a very nice project. It deals with ammonia, as you will see, and it's our flagship project of our team, right? And we are very lucky and happy to serve as project coordinators and also technical leads. And a little bit more details about caipirinha. Caipirinha deals with the combustion of liquid ammonia assisted by plasma discharges as an alternative carbon-free fuel. And the whole concept deals with the development of a next-generation smart combustor that can efficiently burn liquid ammonia. And we do this by incorporating experimentally validated kinetic and plasma modeling, CFD, combustion simulations, in order to fabricate, in the end, efficient liquid ammonia injection systems, tailored plasma systems, control strategies for combustion towards the demonstration at TRL4. We aim to apply and show the benefits of this technology in different sectors, from power generation, maritime, aviation, and automotive, and in the end have a combustor that can burn efficiently ammonia with minimum NOx emissions and other pollutants. We have a very strong consortium. The project started very recently, in last November. It will run for 4 years. So I invite you to follow us on LinkedIn and on Twitter, on X, if you want to learn about the developments in the near future. That's all for the introduction. Let's go to the real seminar now. And we'll start seeing why we need plasma modeling. I'll give you a brief background on plasma models. Then we'll be focusing on plasma fluids, fluid models, and then I'll present some case studies, and I'll conclude to give some perspectives. So starting about the power of modeling, I really like to focus on these 3 keywords when I'm talking about modeling: understand, predict, and optimize. So this is why we need modeling. We need to understand key physicochemical aspects of plasmas, especially where experimental diagnosis is very hard to give us insights. We want to predict discharge dynamics and application-focused outputs, and we want to optimize plasma reactor setups towards enhanced efficiency. And why we want to do this? Well, because non-thermal plasma technology is quite relevant to what we call a sustainable future. As you all know, non-thermal plasmas can find application in green chemical synthesis, gas conversion, plasma catalysis, in water treatment, in plasma-assisted combustion and plasma actuators, in sterilization of surfaces, air, food, and seed germination, of course, in the synthesis and fertilization of advanced materials, but also in communication and IT by controlling wave and plasma properties, creating plasma antennas, plasma metamaterials, etc., etc. So in all these applications, modeling can support the developments. It can help understand, predict, and optimize different reactors or different setups so that we move from lower TRL levels, technology readiness levels, to something that's really applied and makes sense for the future of our world. So how does it work? This thing is still down. See, it's okay. I just give here a very, let's say, simple workflow of how any kind of numerical modeling should go with, right? I like to say that it's all math to me, and how we start from equations. And of course, in plasma physics, in plasma modeling, physics is very important too. So the first step for any modeling approach is to define the problem. So we have to identify the physical system behavior that we want to model, and then establish the governing equations. This can be partial differential equations, ordinary differential equations, algebraic equations, whatever it is. Then we need to move from the continuous world to the discretized world. So we need to discretize these equations in the numerical format that we can solve them efficiently. And there we can use different numerical schemes, on finite differences, finite elements, and finite volumes. Then we have to choose also what is the spatial and temporal resolution that we need, and discretize accordingly and create schemes that provide this resolution. On the third stage, we need to solve. So we need to choose an appropriate solver for our system of equations, let's say. And there are a lot of different solvers that we need to choose, depending on the precision, depending on the convergence requirements, etc., etc. And of course, code the solver. Now we have everything, but we need to actually choose a language, a programming language, and code the whole solver. the language that we'll choose is important because different languages have different precisions, different efficiencies, etc., etc. So it's a very important step to choose correctly your programming language. Then, of course, if everything is complete, we want to simulate. We simulate the actual system of interest, and then we have some results. We want to visualize them, post-process them, analyze them, and very importantly, validate with theory and/or experiments. Because without validation, numerical modeling doesn't make really sense. So if you see this workflow, you might wonder, say, okay, is it that simple? In the end, it's not, doesn't seem like extremely difficult. Well, the answer is, of course, no. And it's not that simple, especially in plasma modeling, because mainly of the complexity of non-local thermal equilibrium and atmospheric pressure plasma sources. And we have a variety of them. For example, in plasma jets, typically they involve high-speed neutral gas flows, often with temperature gradients and turbulence effects, also complex plasma chemistries, especially in atmospheric jets. All these provide numerical challenges that are hard to solve. In conditions where we have non-uniform electric fields, such as point-to-plane, for example, configurations, we have localized regions with intense electric fields, which initiate ionization. Then we can have the formation of corona discharges or streamer discharges. And in streamers, we have sharp ionization fronts with steep gradients, where even photonization, depending on the background gas, of course, can play an important role. And it's a non-local process, which is, again, very hard to solve. In dielectric barrier discharges, we have a transient discharge behavior. These discharges are excited by AC sources. Charge accumulation on the electric surface is extremely important and influences the local field, but also the discharge dynamics. We can have complex shift dynamics formed in every half cycle of one AC period, and then we need to run any simulation in multiple cycles in order to have a convergence to what we call a quasi-steady state. And then we shouldn't forget that we have even more complicated discharges in the form of microwave discharges and high-frequency complex wave-plasma interactions. We have electron heating, resonance effects, etc., while the microwave excitation sources themselves are quite complex also to model and can have a lot of reflections, electromagnetic energy, etc., etc. Moreover, plasma by default is a highly nonlinear, coupled and stiff numerical problem. And why is that? Well, it's because we have this very nice coupling and very strong coupling between electric fields, charge transport, plasma densities, reaction rates, and space charge that look iteratively self-consistently between each other. So all these effects can make, for example, Poisson's equation extremely stiff and sensitive to local density gradients. Then the transport and reaction coefficients can be non-linearly dependent on electron temperature or reduced fields. We have shear formations and ionization waves that introduce discontinuous behavior, etc., etc. Of course, when we couple it with fluid dynamics or electromagnetic wave propagation, we have more and more challenges for the numerical solvers. For example, time steps are often limited due to very, very strict stability criterion or the dielectric relaxation timescales, especially in explicit schemes. Then the stiffness of the Jacobian matrices typically require implicit or semi-implicit schemes, which are hard also to develop and to be robust. We can have strong coupling, which limits operator splitting effectiveness. Sharp gradients typically require adaptive mesh refinement techniques, and even Newton-like methods typically are hard to converge near critical field transitions. And what all this means is that modeling efficiency is often limited not by physics knowledge, but by numerical stability and convergence, often linked to scale separation. And talking about scale, plasma is a very, very, very multi-scale problem. There is an extreme discrepancy between temporal and spatial scales, especially under atmospheric pressure. For example, in terms of time scales, we can go as small and as short as the dielectric relaxation time, for example. They can be way lower than 1 picosecond, and then we have very large time scales, for example, linked to gas heating, which can go up to hundreds of milliseconds. Then in spatial scales, we can have scales that link to the length or sheath thicknesses, especially in atmospheric pressure discharges that can go down to micrometer range. And then we can have an electrostatic domain, for example, that is tens of centimeters. So we can see that you have a huge discrepancy of both temporal and spatial scales, which make modeling very challenging. So the question here is there an all-around model? Is there a plasma model that we can use and can deal with all these nonlinearities, different scales, etc., etc.? And the answer is no. Of course, there is no one-size-fits-all models. So let's go and see what kind of models exist. And in the end, we'll see why we need multidimensional self-consistent models to model some kind of plasma sources. Let's start by representing the three main families, let's say, of plasma models. The first one is what we call a continuum kinetic models. These are Boltzmann solvers that represent particles as a continuum by their distribution function. So by integrating the Boltzmann equation in velocity space, we can resolve the steady state non-Maximilian electron energy distribution function. And these solvers typically are used to output transport and rate coefficient as a function of reduced electric field, so the electron temperature, to be used in different solvers after that. They're also used to check consistency between cross-sections and measure macroscopic swarm parameters. But these solvers are typically zero-dimensional. They're homogeneous and under a two-term approximation, so local or non-local. And they're not self-consistent. The input is the electric field that is given by the user, right? In the second family of plasma models, we will find the particle-based kinetic models. These are typically based in particle and cell characterization and Monte Carlo collision models. And therein we track individual particles or macroparticles in the particle and cell formulation in phase space. These are very, very, very accurate models, right? Because they're fully self-consistent. So we solve the Poisson equation, we can resolve the EDF, we have access to the velocity distributions, they can include non-local effects, they can properly describe scenes, also wave-particle interactions, and they naturally capture non-Maximilian effects and fast electron kinetics. The problem with such models is that they're extremely CPU demanding, and especially in 2D or 3D or long-time simulations, and also they require large particle numbers or grid resolution to reduce noise. All this makes them very, very challenging, especially for multidimensional simulations. The third family is what we call the plasma fluid models, and these models provide a self-consistent description of plasma, but macroscopically. So they are kind of like CFD-like solvers, I would say, and they're very nice because you can capture bulk behavior very well, especially high collisionality. They're efficient and scalable, so we can go towards 3D simulations. They're suitable for reactor scale, long-time and multidimensional and physical simulations, and they can handle large chemical networks quite well. The problem with them is that they fail for non-Maxwellian or highly anisotropic conditions, so as they cannot capture detailed kinetics, for example, runaway electrons, tail populations, etc., etc., and they typically fail to capture also accurately seed phenomena. I'll be focusing on the fluid modeling family of models, but before doing that, I think I would like to spend a couple of slides talking about what we call 0D or global or reaction kinetics model. And why I'm doing that is because I see that from a lot of, especially young researchers, etc., these are models that are quite easy to have access on, but it's hard for them to understand what are their limitations. So I'd like to give an overview of what they can do and what they cannot do. So 0D models or global models, they are very simple. Typically, they're described by this equation. We can even forget this term, and which says that the evolution, the temporal evolution of each species is described by a very simple kinetic equation that links with the rate of progress of the reactions sets that we've included in the system. So they are good because you can capture essential volume average behavior of a plasma system quite fast and efficient. They can incorporate EDF solvers easily, so they have some kind of self-consistency therein. They can describe plasma breakdowns, species temporal evolution effectively and in a CPU inexpensive manner. So they can be used to provide qualitative mainly trends and scaling, predict fast how plasma properties changes with different input parameters, power, gas flow rate, pressure, etc., before moving to higher fidelity models. They are very, very good also to capture complex and rich bulk plasma chemistry, because here we can use a very, very, very complex chemistry model, so we can explore the chemistry network and the dominant species pathways. They can also provide reasonable estimates for power balance, for example, for plasma power efficiency, gas heating, etc., etc. But these kind of models have also a lot of limitations. And what are these limitations? Well, they come from their zero-D nature by itself. First of all, they cannot resolve spatial futures or predict local plasma properties. They are zero-D, so they cannot really work in seas. Boundary laws are hard for them to incorporate, or field gradients. They assume homogeneous properties, so they can easily give incorrect predictions of electric fields, ionization zones, and fluxes to wall, and they can give only global averages, as we said, so it's not extremely useful for design of devices, complex devices. Secondly, they cannot really describe the electric field distribution. Most global models either prescribe electric fields or ignore them entirely. And as they are zero-D, they cannot solve Poisson's equation. It doesn't make any sense. So they cannot really account for feedback between charge distribution and field. I'll put an asterisk here because we'll see in the next slide that this can happen with some tricks. But as a third main aspect, global models cannot really describe accurately, at least, wall interactions, because surface phenomena like wall losses, combination, secondary emission are often ignored or modeled with very simple approximations. I invite you to see the paper from Alves from 2023, I think, in Plasma Source Science Technology, who talks about this. It's a very nice paper. And so this kind of non-accuracy in the wall interactions can provide very inaccurate particle energy balances, especially in devices where surface to volume ratio is large. But in reality, in real plasmas, changes in power, pressure, or even geometry can feed back through the plasma chemistry and field distribution, right? We've seen that all physical processes are mutually consistent, which means that the plasma dynamics and the electromagnetic fields should be solved simultaneously and iteratively. So global models cannot really do this. As I said before, there are some tricks. So we can couple with external circuits, or we can couple with power balance equations, and these kind of coupling techniques might do the trick in the end. But we have to be careful because this works only for specific cases, and especially when experimental data are available. So we're losing kind of real self-consistency there. Secondly, in real plasmas, charged species transport, diffusion, wall interaction, we see different plasma regimes, even in a specific source, render the system highly spatiotemporally non-uniform, highly nonlinear, and highly transient. So again, we lose of accuracy, and we have charged particle transport models. I showed you before in this equation that we have this loss term, for example, that we can incorporate some losses, but again, how we tune these losses is not work for all. It cannot work for all kind of cases. So again, we have to be careful on how we use these models and how accurate the results are. So in the end, multidimensional models are often necessary if you want to describe properly and self-consistently some plasma discharges. And a very recent example of complex dynamics that we can find in atmospheric pressure plasmas comes from the work that we've been doing along with Christak, Dimitris, and Nikos, and the other guys from here from LSPM for the past 3 weeks on what we call the aerosol jet printed surface DBD actuators. So what are these? These are very simple devices. In general, the surface DBDs consist of electrodes that are printed on top of the electric layer. So one of them can be excited by an AC source, the other one can be grounded, and then we can have the surface plasma that's initiated on the surface of the dielectric, and depending on the excitation source, so we have AC excitation, we can have the formation of wall normal jets, and then we'll have nanosecond or pulse excitation, we can have the formation of heating, the heat energy deposition and heating on the surface. What we did in CERTH, we're using our aerosol jet printer, which is a device that can be used to print very thin conductive inks onto any kind of surface with very, very fine future and very, very high precision. So we did that with different shapes. Here, I'll show you a top view of the aerosol jet printed surface DBT. We see here the circular gap, let's say. So this is the top electrode, and then from the bottom side, you can see the bottom electrode. And here we characterize these discharges, and here are some images from single cameras that we took for the annular design. So this design is the top view of this plasma device. And this is what we call a flower-like design, where the circular cross-section here, it takes from these bump cross-sections. And if you look at these camera images, you can say, well, okay, at least for the annular concept, well, the plasma seems more or less uniform, you know, it's not extremely dynamic, but this is wrong. And we know that, of course, since a long time. If you look at the VI curves, for example, you can see that in the positive and negative going phases of the AC waveform, we have different plasma regimes, especially in the positive going phases, we have this multitude of current pulses that correspond to streamer filamentary discharges. And then if we see just a snapshot of an ICCD image inside this positive phase, we can see the complexity of these filamentary discharges. They are extremely random, they are complex, etc., etc. So it's very hard with simple local models to describe this kind of process. So again, we need multidimensional plasma models, right? And as we saw before, the main families are the particle-based kinetic models and the fluid models. But where and how we can use these kind of models? Well, particle-based kinetic models are excellent. They can be used, honestly, in low pressure, in very low pressure, up to atmospheric pressure and even beyond. They're extremely accurate. The non-Maxwellian EDF is naturally captured. So we can have also effects of non-local transport include these models. So they can be used to properly describe seeds, RF heating, Hall thrusters, fusion-edge plasma, synchronous swarms, and they can resolve the velocity space. So these are excellent solvers as we saw before, but they're extremely CPU demanding. From the other point of view, fluid models typically are used in collisional plasmas when we have high collisionality, so in moderate and high pressures. Typically, we say that we have a parameter that provides a limitation of when we can use fluid numbers and fluid models, and this comes from the Knudsen number, which is a ratio of the electron mean free path to the characteristic length scale of the plasma. And we say they'll have to be lower than 1, quite lower than 1 for fluid models to be valid. But fluid models have already been used to describe ICPs, glow discharges, streamers, plasma jets, also MHD-like regimes. And there are various approximations that we'll see that can extend a little bit the validity regime of these models. And is there something in between these very accurate but very expensive and less accurate, let's say, but less expensive models? And yes, these are hybrid models, which are very nice because they can retain kinetic accuracy where needed, for example, for electrons, using the Boltzmann or particle cell solver, and then can model ions or neutrals or even slow electrons with fluid equations to reduce cost. These are very nice models, but still require careful coupling and interface handling. And this is not easy, it's challenging because we must still have consistent particle fluid coupling in order to have stability and energy conservation. So going to the next chapter, we'll focus on plasma fluid models, and we'll see why they're beautiful and why they have also some and a lot of challenges themselves. Let's start by seeing what do we mean by plasma fluid description itself. So we suppose that we have the plasma is composed of 2 or more interpenetrating fluid, 1 for each species. And in the plasma fluid world, we use typical formulations that are used in the CERTH community, for example, continuity equation that comes from the 0th order moment of the Boltzmann equation, and the momentum equation which comes from the 1st order moment of the Boltzmann equation. So with these 2 equations, coupled of course with the Poisson equation, we can have a system that we call a full momentum model or a multi-fluid model. But then there is a very common approximation that we use, especially in high pressure discharges, and this is called the drift diffusion approximation. And how do we derive the drift diffusion approximation? We have to make some assumptions. So first of all, we assume that collisions are dominant and take place on much shorter time and length scales than macroscopic field and pressure variations. So inertia terms can go away, and then we assume also isothermal conditions. We can reach to a description of the flux in the form of a drift flux and a diffusion flux. And this is very nice because it simplifies a lot of our problem, and it's still valid, especially in regimes that we'll see next slide. Of course, this kind of equation have to be coupled with Poisson equation. Poisson equation will give you the distribution of the potential, so we can calculate the electric field and then calculate the reaction rates depending on the reduced electric field to be inputted here in the continuity equation and in the source term. Next, we can have even more advanced, let's say, models based on the electron energy equation, where the reaction rates depend on the electron temperature. We'll see a little bit more of that in the next slides. Of course, I'm not going to talk about this because this needs another seminar thing, but appropriate boundary conditions is always extremely important in plasma modeling and need to be taken into account carefully. Let's see very, very broadly what are the validity regimes of the first approximations that we said, neglecting inertia to come to the drift diffusion approximation. So I would say that drift diffusion is better to be used when we have, of course, high collisionality or high electric fields, which lead to this quasi-state drift velocity for charged species. So collisions dominate over acceleration. We should use it when we don't have very, very fast transients, for example, in RF discharges. So we need instantaneous response to electric fields. And I would say that when we need detailed CERTH dynamics to be modeled, I would not really go and use a drift diffusion approximation, especially if we want to go and check what happens in the seats. In all other cases, I would say that the multi-fluid description, so solving also the momentum equation, should be used and provides a way better approximation because everything's approximation in the end of the plasma dynamics, and especially for ions in low pressure regimes where inertia can dominate. Here a note, because I think it's very interesting, there is a very recent paper that was published in 2025 by Gangemi and his co-authors. It's named Bridging Multi-Fluid and Drift Diffusion Models for Bounded Plasmas in the Physics of Plasmas. And therein, the authors used a non-dimensional analysis to check and come up with a limit of validity of the multi-fluid and drift diffusion approximation. And they said that this limit corresponds to a Knudsen number that is the square root of the electron to ion mass ratio. So still, there is a lot of work to be done, but we see with this kind of works that we can have precise limits where we know which model should be used properly. Now, in terms of equilibrium, as I very briefly discussed before, we have two main approximations. The classic approximation used in the plasma fluid world is a local field approximation, where we assume that the EDF is determined only by the local induced electric field. And this approximation is valid when the energy relaxation time is way smaller than the time scale when the field changes, and when the energy relaxation length is also smaller than the characteristic length of the discharge. This ensures that the local equilibrium of electron energy with the electric field prevails, and then all transport and range coefficients depend on the local electric field. From the other hand, we have what some authors also call extended fluid model, the local mean energy approximation, where we assume that the EDF is determined by the local mean electron energy. So in this approach, non-locality of electron transport is partially incorporated through an electron energy balance. We have, of course, the same validity, more or less restriction of LFA, as we had before, and while still rather local, this approximation allows for nonlinear field variation and better describes especially time-varying fields. So we can better describe CERTH dynamics, and this mild non-locality that we introduce due to the solution and non-local transport of the electron energy conservation equation, I give here, it can provide better results, but can also help a lot in the stability of plasma fluid simulations, especially when we're dealing with streamer discharges or very complex discharges. I'm not going to spend a lot of time in this slide. I tried just to use from literature some comparison results between different models. I think it's a very nice reference for you. For example, in this first study in low pressure DC blow discharges, the authors showed that hybrid and fluid models under the local mean energy approximation showed better agreement apart from CERTH dynamics. Then in 2016, Babaeva studied atmospheric pressure nanosecond surface DBDs with hybrid solvers and fluid models under LFA. They showed that we have discrepancies, especially in the plasma dielectric CERTH region. But on the other hand, in 2022, Wang et al. From Eindhoven University studied atmospheric pressure air streamers with a full kinetic treatment and a fluid model under LFA, and they showed surprisingly good agreement for electric fields, also in the streamer head, for streamer radius and velocity. All right, so we talked about different models, different approximation in plasma fluid modeling. So already we get a little bit of the complexity of choosing what we choose, how do we go with these, what are the issues of numerical stability and convergence. But let's see now a little bit, a very quick example of how easily we can increase the complexity of these models and how computationally expensive they can be. So let's assume that we have a very simple 10 centimeter by 10 centimeter domain in 2D, right? And this is our simulation domain. In atmospheric pressure plasmas, typically the mesh requirements are micrometric. I would say that, let's say we need to have a uniform grid size of 2 micrometers for each cell. In 2D, this will give us 25 million cells. So 25 million cells means 25 million equations, plus equations from Poisson, from electron temperature, if we're using the local mean energy approximation, or for a gas temperature, if we want to solve the gas energy equation also. And these equations need to be solved per time step, just for one species. So imagine now we have a chemistry, very simplified chemistry of only 3 species. It's a super simplified model. So already we have 150 million equations per time step. Now in typical plasma fluid modeling, especially in high pressures, the dilated relaxation time, or the CFL criterion, it's very small. Here I just chose a delta t, so a time step of 1 nanosecond. Believe me, this is a quite large time step. Then if we use an explicit time integration, we know that for most explicit schemes, the cost per step is ON, so it linearly increases with the number of unknowns. Then if we have an implicit scheme, then the cost is a little bit more, but if we do the calculation, we can see that if we want to simulate just 1 millisecond of the discharge development, whatever it be, we need around 1,000 or 10,000 teraflops. Teraflops mean tera of floating point operations. This, maybe it's hard to understand, but this is a supercomputer level scale. And again, here we have a chemistry of 3 species. Imagine if we had a chemistry of 20 species or even more. Imagine all the time needed for the solver itself to write data, to read data, etc., etc. We can easily go to very large scales that need high performance computing and parallel computing capabilities. I would just like now to give some practical considerations, again, very broad, of course, for how we can reduce numerical complexity. Some of our audience might find, I hope, useful. So first of course, comes without saying, instead of having a structured grid where all cell sizes have to be the same, we can use a non-uniform and unstructured mesh. So by that, we can have local refinement wherever we need it and reduce the total number of cells of our numerical domain. Very nice also to use adaptive mesh refinement techniques whenever possible, because then we can locally refine or coarsen based on predefined criteria, for example, density gradients if we have a streamer propagating. In terms of the time integration, we can use implicit or semi-implicit time stepping methods, which are stable beyond CFL-like criteria, so we can use large time steps. We need to use also, as much as possible, efficient solvers and operator splitting techniques. So for example, for a Poisson equation, we can use fast Poisson solvers, multi-grid solvers for the system of equations, strand splitting to split the operators and then apply efficient solvers for each different operator that we have. We can also use local, adaptive, or super time stepping techniques, so we can separate time scales based on species properties. And of course, as I said before, it's very important to use parallel computing. The same work that you will do in a single node, you can do it way faster when you are utilizing high performance computing infrastructure and multi-core servers. So in the end, I would say that based on what you're looking for, I would say first choose simplicity over extreme accuracy if possible, and increase the precision step by step, because easily you can end up with a simulation that can last several weeks or months. The next slide goes and deals with what I like to call, in all kind of modeling and simulation, garbage in, garbage out. So whatever, if you put garbage in, you should expect that you'll have garbage out at the end. So it's very important to use accurate reaction rates. I would say scrutinize literature and databases and new resources to be sure that these reaction rates are accurate, or as accurate as possible. Same goes for the transport rates, of course. Then we have to make sure that numerical errors are bounded because spatial and temporal discretization schemes need to be carefully chosen and validated so that they reduce numerical errors. I would suggest you choose high order and TVD schemes, especially for spatial discretization, although even exponential schemes work quite fine for atmospheric pressure plasmas. Then we saw that plasma problems are nonlinear, and these nonlinearities can build up easily, and they can increase numerical errors, so make sure that your solver can handle them properly. And of course, mesh quality is very, very important. Refine towards getting mesh convergence. I will say this, and I will reiterate because I've been there before, using a mesh that I thought that it was proper. Then I've started studying different schemes, going into the super numerical details and maths of numerical solvers, while we can just improve properly the mesh quality and in the end up with a solver and a system that is converging very nicely. Lastly, but not less importantly, initial and boundary conditions are also very important, so we have to choose them wisely. In the end, I would say that any software or solver might provide results, but this doesn't mean that these results are correct. So we have to be sure that we can validate these results and know that these results are at least close to what we expect. All right, so now I would just like to show you some of results in terms of multidimensional plasma modeling. I have chosen just a few results because I don't think I have a lot of time. Christian, how much time do you have?
You have maybe 15 minutes.
15? Yeah. Okay, yeah, I think we'll be fine. So let's start. The first example that I would like to show is a work that I've done in CO2 splitting in a packed bed EBD reactor. So the motivation here was to understand the spatiotemporal dynamics and influence of species distribution inside an AC cycle based on the experimental work from Zug. Here we can see the coaxial packed bed EBD reactor that they used. You can see here in the blue circles dielectric rods that were used as the packed bed system inside. And here in the IC image, you can see an IC image of the discharge. Here is the dielectric rods. You can see the streamer discharges that form on the region between the inner surface of the coaxial electrode and the dielectric rod. What they've seen, the authors of this experimental paper, is that by introducing more and more rods, they can initiate more and more streamer discharges, and this has an influence in CO2 conversion, increasing the CO2 conversion. So we would like to understand how this happens and what kind of dynamics we can have inside this AC excitation. So we used our Copayet solver to do this, and we did the simulations in a frequency of 2 kHz with a peak-to-peak voltage of 13.5 kilovolt. Here is the voltage that has been applied to the electrodes, and here is a calculated current. What we can see in the positive and negative phases, we have multiple current peaks. From our results also, we can calculate very easily and extract the Lissajous curves, which is a very nice thing because compared with experiments, etc., we can understand a lot of features from that, both for the plasma in the blue line, but also for the dielectric. Okay, let's see now how these dynamics happen inside an AC cycle. So here we have the AC cycle. In this plot, there's a video that I will play in a while. We'll see the electron density distribution, the spatiotemporal electron density distribution. Of course, here we see just a section, right? The whole reactor. Imagine this is a circle and it has the electric rods all around. And on the second slide, we'll see the distribution of the electric field magnitude. But with them as fast as possible. Go. Yeah, perfect. So what we see here is that this is the first current peak. We are on the positive going phase. This is the second current peak. You see this glow-like discharge that goes and converges towards the external surface of the dielectric, and then we have this surface ionization wave that propagates towards the region where we have the dielectric rod. And now we're going to the negative phase slowly. You see here the redistribution of the electric field due to the surface charging effects of both the electric rod and the external dielectric. Here we have the negative first discharge, the second discharge, and then we'll see a third discharge forming here. Then we go again back to the positive phase. And as you see, we have multiple discharge regimes and phases present inside an AC cycle of streamer discharges, surface ionization waves, glow-type discharges, and also afterglows. And residual charges are strongly non-uniform, and these are crucial for subsequent discharges because they change the breakdown zones and also the propagation zones of all these micro discharges. And of course, surface charging plays a crucial role, right? As we saw, it really redistributes the potential distribution inside the reactor. So the question is how this in the end reflects cycle average values. We calculated the cycle average values of electrons, of oxygen ions, of CO2 plus and CO, and we see that both charged and neutral species present large inhomogeneities in space, right? And then if we plot the spatially average species density and the electric field versus the time, we can see that these non-uniformities also reflect into the spatially average data, which in the end can be used, for example, in 0D models to provide a more accurate estimation of CO2 efficiency because now we have the electric field data inside the AC period. The next example that I would like to show, this is in collaboration with Anera. It's quite old work that we do, but I think it's very nice. It deals with surface AC DPD actuators, so pretty similar to the ones that I showed you before, the Ambula cases, but these are in linear designs. So these actuators, as been seen here by the work from Bernard and Al from Poitiers University, they show completely different regimes in positive going phases and negative going phases. In positive going phase, we have streamer discharges. You see here, in negative going phases, we have micro discharges, very close to the exposed electrode. And our motivation here was to understand where the electrohydrodynamic forces are produced inside the AC cycle. And to do this, we simulated this kind of discharges in a 2D approximation. And we came up with the VI curves. You see here in multiple cycles, the streamer discharge with this high current peak here, and then the negative discharges, these multiple pulses. And you can see here. Again, we can extract information about surface charging, which I think is quite important and nice. Also from our simulations and the time evolution of the surface discharge in the positive phase and in the negative phase. And then we can extract, of course, all the spatiotemporal evolution of potential, of electron energy density, for example, during the streamer propagation, of positive and negative ions distribution in space and time. I think more important, more interesting maybe to show this video, which shows the electron energy temperature inside one, inside one AC cycle. So we're here in the positive going phase. We see the build-up of electron temperature near the high voltage electrode, which is here. And then the initiation of the surface streamer that propagates along the electric surface, and then it starts relaxing. And then after a point, it will relax that much, it will start charging the electric surface. You can see here a zone on the head of the streamer of high electron temperature. And then on the negative phases, we have the formation of these negative pulses propagate towards the high voltage electrode. This is the second one, etc., etc. And you see here that we have these zones of high electron temperature that move further and further and further. And this is very much linked to surface charge effects in the end. And through these calculations, we managed to explain illustrative also where exactly the production of ESD force happens inside the AC cycle. And then we average also the ESD force inside an AC cycle, introduce this in CFD solvers to reproduce the wall jet flows that are typically seen in experiments. And so we've got also some kind of validation of these flows that are generated by these plasma actuators. Another example is what we call a surface nanosecond now TBD actuator in a 3-electrode design. This also was based in the work that has been done by the team of Eric Moreau and Nicolas Benard in Payoda in Poitiers. The authors there used a typical linear configuration of a surface TBD, as you see here. This is the first electrode, this is the embedded electrode with a nanosecond pulse. And then they use a third electrode that whenever they biased it with a negative DC voltage, they showed that the streamers that they typically propagate until a certain length they start sliding and elongating on the top of the dielectric surface. These are top views, right? And you see that as we increase the negative applied bias, then the streamers in the end merge and bridge the whole inter-electrode gap. Also, these kind of discharges are very well known to produce what we call pressure waves due to ultra fast gas heating effects. And the authors saw that we have this kind of wave whenever the third electrode is unbiased, and then when we bias it, we have a more complex interaction between two hemispherical waves and then a linear wave also that links the whole inter-electrode gap. So we try to model this, and the motivation were mainly to understand how this sliding discharge happens and why it happens. So we model this, first of all, without assuming that we'll have a third electrode biased here on this side. I don't know if you can see. So this is with a DC of 0 kilovolt. We want in this floating electrode. And we can see that the streamer discharge propagates until a certain length and then it stops propagating inside the nanosecond pulse. But then when we apply a negative voltage on the third electrode, we can see that the streamer continues to propagate and then merges with the third electrode. After studying the potential distribution, the surface charge distribution, etc., we came to the conclusion that what happens in the end is that we have charge drift towards electrode number 3, so which is this electrode, and then due to the surface charge accumulation and the effect of the virtual anode that the first streamer plays, we have a decrease of the relative mean electric field in that region, which causes a breakdown at the electrode 3 and the initiation of this second discharge here in the corner of the third electrode. We coupled also this, we also had spatial and temporal profiles of different excited levels of nitrogen. Here we use a quite complex chemistry, so that we included also quenching of atoms with oxygen and to be included as ultra fast gas heating mechanisms, and then coupling there with a compressible fluid solver, we captured also these hemispherical and linear waves that are produced by such nanosecond pulsed DBT actuators. Another example, this is very recent, this is a work that we've been that we did along with Svetlana Starikovskaya from LPP. Here we try to model nanosecond pulse fast ionization waves in long tubes. So here you see that the inter-electrode gap is 60 centimeters. And the motivation here was mainly to parameterize the fast ionization wave dynamics and to understand why, under different polarity, we see that we have different radial distributions of these discharges, something that was not very well understood before. So we modeled this discharge with a voltage pulse that was given from the experimental side. Here is the current that has been calculated. We calculated the time evolution of the electric field and the electron density for both negative and positive polarities. And these are matched quite well with experimental results of these cases. And then for both negative and positive polarities, we also parameterized the evolution in different pressures. And we calculated the velocity of the FIW in different pressures, again, in negative and positive polarity. The agreements are quite well, I would say. And we also understood that this radial distribution changes due to mainly surface charge accumulation and the tube thickness variation. You see here in positive polarity, in low pressure, in 1 torr, the fast ionization wave propagates in the middle of the domain, while as we increase the pressure or go in negative polarity, we have main propagation towards, let's say, the dielectric tube walls. All right, these are another example in atmospheric pressure plane discharge. This is also very recent and this is not published. This is based on some experimental data received from CNRS and LVP from the group of Svetlana Starikovskaya. The motivation here was to understand qualitatively mostly how subsequent pulse discharge regimes changes depending on the polarity and on the repetition, let's say, rate of these pulses. So here is an experimental zone of a point to plane configuration. We model this with our fluid solver. And as you see here in the red lines, this is the applied voltage that was experimentally applied with the pulse electrode. and the blue line, this is the current that has been calculated by simulations. These are some ICD images of the plasma regime in the first pulse. We see that in the first pulse we have very localized, I'm not sure you can see it right, very localized discharge right here. Then the second pulse we have a more diffuse discharge down here, not sure if it's visible. And then in the third discharge we have a filamentary discharge that emanates from the CERTH tip. So what we've seen is that although the discharge relaxes after each pulse, residual charges and memory effects affects consequent pulses. And maybe it's better to see it here. Can you please go in here? So what we see here is on this half we see the electron density, on this half we see the electron temperature, on this half the positive ion density, and here the electric field. And here we saw the evolution of the first pulse where we have this weak positive streamer which is very well localized near the electrode, and then in the second pulse we have this negative micro discharge and this low diffuse discharge that forms. And then in the third pulse, in a while, it's going to be initiated. We'll have a more intense, here you go, a more intense positive streamer that propagates longer from the electrode tip towards the dielectric. So these are qualitative results. We still need to run more simulations. We aim to make the chemistry also a bit more complex to understand a bit better what happens in this kind of consecutive, let's say, non-sequential pulse discharges. All right, we're approaching the end. I just want to show a little bit some results and also some theory of how we can model high frequency discharges, because this might be also relevant to some people. Typically, in high frequency discharges, we can quite safely assume that because of the microwave period, which is very way smaller than the plasma density or chemistry evolution timescales, you can decompose the electromagnetic field into microwave oscillations and space charge fields, right, obtained by the drift diffusion of Poisson capital. So in microwave time scale, we can solve the Maxwell equations, the Ampere and Faraday law, and the plasma current density can be assumed as such by neglecting ion motion and oscillations of the electron density. So this oscillating electron density inside the period can be given by a local momentum equation, again by neglecting magnetic forces and distances traveled by the electrons during a microwave period. We can come up with a quite simplified local momentum equation for the electrons. And these oscillations of the mean velocity happen with a phase shift with respect to the field between 0 and p/2, and this depends on the momentum transfer frequency, which in the end depends on gas pressure. In terms of a plasma timescale, here in this model, we've used a quasi-neutral approximation for the plasma. So we have a continuity equation in this form, where the diffusion part incorporates an effective diffusion coefficient that transits between free electron diffusion and a bipolar diffusion based on this parameter alpha. This has been validated by Jean-Pierre and his team years ago. Also, we can use a higher order model via the electron equation. All this solver has been massively parallelized in an FDD plasma software format and has been validated in different conditions for electromagnetic wave and plasma interferences. I'll show you just a couple of results of these. So the first one deals with microwave discharges, 3D streamers initiated by localizing electromagnetic energy in high frequency fields, 110 gigahertz in atmospheric pressure with a focal length, with a lens into a particular point. And these experiments happened by Hidaka and al. Back in 2008. And they showed that when they do this, you can have the initiation of this filamentary and fishbone structure, microwave plasma structure that propagates towards the beam. So the beam comes from left to right, and then the plasma propagates from right to left. And here we see the plane of the electric field. So here is a wave vector, and here is the electric field. And if you look this on the other plane of the electric field, you can see that the structure is quite different. In a circular polarization now, in both planes, we have the same fishbone structure, but in both planes, of course, we have symmetrical regimes. And as you see, the distance between each filament is around λ/4. So we try to simulate this with a 3D solver, and we captured both the circular polarity propagation and also the linear polarity propagation. So in the end, what happens here is that the first plasma filament starts from one point like here. It starts elongating in the direction of the electric field. Once this elongation and the plasma density reaches a critical value, then the wave fields are shielded, so they start being reflected and they form stationary waves in a distance of λ/4, and then another filament forms, and then another filament forms, etc., etc. So we have the propagation towards the source. Last example, again, on microwave discharges, is what we call a microwave streamer, so a single microwave streamer based on experiments from Bekarev, Parasenkov, where they saw that if you can focus now electromagnetic waves and form a stationary wave, you have just one single streamer that elongates in the direction of the electric field. So the electric field is in that direction, elongates in the direction of the electric field, but for some reason, it stops elongating at around a length of λ/2. And they couldn't really explain this. They proposed an explanation linked to resonance effects, etc. But what we thought is, well, what happens about gas heating? In this kind of discharges, power deposition and transfer of power of energy to gas is quite efficient. So we thought that maybe gas density changes influences the ionization frequency and the propagation of the microwave streamer. So what we did is that we used our electromagnetic and plasma solver and we coupled it with a compressible fluid solver. So here are the two waves and the initial plasma density that forms a standing wave. And as we'll see, when we don't couple it with gas heating effects, we have a filament that starts elongating in 210 nanoseconds. It has already reached a length of around 1 lambda. And we cannot see any reason for elongation to stop. But then when we couple it with gas heating effects and compressibility effects, we see that even in 300 nanoseconds, the elongation of the streamer stays bounded in 0.5 lambda, which is an excellent agreement also for the experiments. And why this happens, we really have this blast wave formation that forms this zone of high pressure, high density, around the plasma, and this limits the ionization and stops the propagation of the streamer discharge. All right, time for conclusion and some perspectives. Again, I will just say it's very important to choose your model wisely. Here I just have let's say, a recap of most of the things that we've talked about. I would say that if you want to start from somewhere, start from Boltzmann solvers, which of course need accurate cross-sections so they can give you reaction rates and transport rates that you can use, for example, in global 0D models to get feelings and get details on how complex plasma chemistry networks work and what are the main pathways important for your conditions, which then can be used to provide reduced chemistry sets and chemistry models, because this is very important. More complex and self-consistent fluid or peak models, they cannot handle extremely big networks. We saw the complexity of them. So after that, you can incorporate surface interactions. You have to choose your plasma model, of course, accurately. And then maybe after you got your simulations, more detailed simulations, we can come up with reduced order models, surrogate models, etc., take into account also ancillary techniques. And if needed, couple all this with CFD process models, etc., etc. In the end, I would say that each mixture, each reactor, its application, its operation conditions dictate more or less the model to be used and the optimal simplifications to achieve a good ratio between CPU efficiency and desired accuracy. So before you start any modeling attempt, wonder, first of all, what is that I want to understand, which is my motivation. And this most probably will lead you to choose the appropriate models and appropriate approximations in order to reduce complexity. Of course, you have to be sure that they're valid. Then you have to use appropriate numerical schemes and understand if accuracy is important or if you want qualitative, maybe information to be extracted from the simulations. And understand what is the CPU time needed. Do you have the required resources? You don't want to end up doing all the work, spend months of developing something or years maybe of developing something, and then in the end say, okay, I'll need 6 months for one single simulation. Doesn't make that much sense maybe. Of course, again, think about how accurate are your inputs, transport the rate coefficients, because plasma models in the end are very powerful when one knows their limitations, but it does require multidisciplinary expertise, effort, and a lot of experience. In some perspectives for the future, I would say that community standards really need to be set, especially also for the numerical community. I suggest you to look at the paper of Alves from 2023, which deals with foundation of plasma standards. I think we need to define benchmark and validation cases, and this is where the experimental community should be on our side also to create simple test cases that we can model and validate different models. Then in terms of open source codes, in the past years, I've seen a lot coming out from the literature, but unfortunately, many of them are not very well documented, and I see that there is no continuity in sustaining them. So I think it's very important to have continuity of this very long effort of some groups developing something that being lost. It's not very nice. And of course, we need to have clear description of assumptions, data, chemistry, etc., so we can compare and validate between different models and different groups. I would say that it's, at least in my humble opinion, we need to have a focus of our community towards large-scale, multi-physical, and three-dimensional simulations. So for this, we need synergies between different groups, between different expertise, etc. And we, of course, need to ride the AI wave. We should not be left behind because machine learning techniques such as physics-informed neural networks, etc., should complement the developments that can help maybe accelerate a lot these kind of simulations. In the end, I would like to say that we all love commercial solvers. They are easy to use, but the black box and roles that are typically incorporate is not great. While owning the numerical recipes means full control on error estimates, flexibility on restructuring the code, and optimizing it. Also, I would say that license fees linked to commercial solvers do not really assist the community, especially young researchers, because not everybody has the budget to buy these commercial softwares. And most importantly, maybe the lack of day-to-day friction and feedback on modeling aspects, which you gain by developing your own code, might easily lead to incorrect results due to lack of experience. Just this. So this is not a mathematical formula. It means thank you very much. I hope you found this seminar helpful. If you have any questions, I'll be glad to answer. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Konstantinos. This was an insightful talk. I think showed different aspects of models, and of course, there are key requirements for many applications, comparisons with different types of diagnostics, and also different types of plasmas. So I think we have some time for questions, maybe from the audience here in the room. Is any question? Or people online can write in the chat, or open their microphone directly and ask questions.
May I please?
Yes, please.
Hello, first of all, thank you very much, Konstantinos, for this fantastic talk, because it's at the same time pedagogical, because you explain what people do in numerical modeling. And I think for people who do experiment, so like for my team people, it's very, very important to understand this. And for us, collaboration with people who is doing numerical modeling and can really be somehow deeply involved in the experiment. It's very important. And this is about both, thank you very much, demonstrating these examples. One, actually, Konstantinos came to me and told me, can we model something together? And this was experiment we did like 20 years ago, but none explained it up to now. And this resulted in the paper. And another example, this was actually a collaboration with LSPM. So this was a work done together for NTALIF, and it's thanks to Konstantinos' modeling, we were able to explain better what we see. So thank you very much. It's just a compliment.
Thank you, Svetlana. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Svetlana. If there is not any other question from the audience, I have some questions. That's maybe some more general stuff that I would like to have your comments on that. So you mentioned that Models, of course, they have different aspects, and the key requirements are to understand some system that you want to study, then to be able to predict its behavior, and then to optimize, of course, depending on your purpose. And how important is the validation of the model in that case? Can the model itself alone provide the details on it?
It's an excellent question. I think I maybe got lost inside too many slides of the seminar, but validation is of utmost importance. We start by validating. We cannot start by just running simulations and getting some results without knowing if these results are correct. As I said, garbage in is garbage out in numerical modeling. It's very easy, especially in commercial solvers, to get results out of any simulation. It doesn't mean that they're correct. So even if you're using commercial solvers, I would say start by going back to the community test cases that they have been established back in days, or try to simulate something that is well described experimentally and try to validate your model. Once it's validated, you can deviate a little bit, especially if you run into similar conditions. So if the pressures are the same, if the electric fields that you expect are the same, you can say, okay, I validated in one case. Of course, you cannot validate in all cases, right? But you can move to that. So this is why I think it's very, very important somehow to create a community between experimentalists and numerical people and say, okay, let's define simple cases. A simple, let's say, pin-to-plate streamer discharge, right? Pulsed or whatever it is in the end, and let's define exactly the dimensions, the conditions, etc., and then different groups can start simulating that. And let's see, do our solvers deviate in the end? Can we describe what's described experimentally? So yeah, because that it's the first step of any modeling effort. Validation.
Okay, and another question refers to the Knudsen number.
Yeah.
So if you reach this limit, does it mean that model is impossible to be solved beyond this? So
it's not impossible to be solved, but it means that you need to have a kinetic description of your plasma. I mean, the same more or less happens in fluids, right? Everything starts from kinetic description, and then we go to the fluid approximation. So this means that you probably need to go to a kinetic model or a hybrid model. Again, you have to see which kind of species, because sometimes the Knudsen number can be very small for ions and higher for electrons. So which ones you will treat kinetically? Well, you can do hybrid models that can deal with these aspects.
Maybe another question that I had until the half of the presentation, but then I think you answered it, but I will put it in any case because I think it's important. You mentioned, okay, all the aspects that you need to consider for the electric field, the reactions, etc. But then you mentioned the mesh construction.
Yeah.
So how important is, and how you know from the beginning which mesh you will construct, and is it trial and error every time that?
This links very well with what I said in the end. I think it was my last sentence. Experience counts a lot. In every kind of modeling world, even if we start in CFD, I've seen so many students or young people starting with CFD and doing a mesh. And it's so easy for someone that's experienced to say, okay, you have to mesh properly there or change that and that. In the plasma world, it needs also experience to understand, for example, the atmospheric conditions, what are the sheath thicknesses that you should expect. So you need to have some cells, for example, inside the expected sheath, right? Then what kind of gradients do you have? You need to be able to resolve them. It can be a trial and error also approach. So you can run some calculations, you see where your plasma evolves, because this is sometimes unknown. We saw that in the CO2 bed reactor, the plasma initiates in different regimes, different aspects. So where do I refine, And this is what I did back in the day, I remember that I ran some simulations, I saw that, okay, the second discharge now initiates in different positions. So I tried to remesh appropriately in these zones. Of course, adaptive mesh refinement techniques are way better, right? Because they can easily and adaptively, inside the calculation, change the mesh accordingly. This is not a given also. It's hard to get proper, conservative, adaptive mesh refinement techniques.
And maybe a last question. How important is to develop your own code instead of using commercial software? And maybe sometimes it's better to use commercial software.
Yeah, it's a good question. $1 million question. I really think that developing your own code gives you all the structure and the knowledge needed in order to own your results. Because you really own the results. And in plasma modeling, it's not like CFD, you know. In CFD, if you could tell me, why don't you develop your own code? I would tell you, well, go and use ANSYS. It's been there for 50 years. The community is huge. Even OpenFOAM is very, very, very well established and validated, etc., etc. So there's no reason of developing a it's not single, but an average solver. Now in plasma modeling, physics and insights, it's extremely important. If you have a black box approach and you cannot control things, it's easy to get into troubles of either results that are wrong or not getting convergence, etc., and then you cannot do anything, right? And you're like, oh, what do I do? So I would say that it's very important. Of course, it's quite easy to use commercial solvers, and they're there for a reason. They're powerful also, right? There are a lot of different commercial solvers, way powerful. So it's just a matter of, in the end, how deep into the modeling world you want to enter. And some people, I don't expect them from all communities of experimentalists also that they want to do some simulation, they will develop their own code. It doesn't make sense. So for them, yeah, maybe it makes sense to do like a fast simulation in commercial solver.
Okay.
Could I make a question, if
yes,
it's
please,
possible?
Yes.
Hello, Konstantinos. Thank you very much for your interesting talk. I would like to ask you if, to your knowledge, there is a community established around plasma modeling, and if if there are many people that work as a unity or split the work or so regularly and meet up per year, let's say.
Mihaly, thank you so much, because I don't think there is a community like this, or I'm not aware of this. I don't know. It might happen also. I don't think in France there is a modeling plasma community, right? There is no.
There are many modelers, but
there are many modelers. There are many groups that do modeling, of course. You see also how complex plasma world is, right? When you say modeling, some people just spend all their career modeling thrusters, right? Propulsion, ion propulsion engines, etc., which is a huge domain on its own. So depending also on the community, there are different groups. In France, they have a lot of experience, but also in the States, there are very, very strong groups. In Belgium, in Netherlands, etc., etc. But I don't think there is a unified community with regular meetups, etc., etc. And I think it would be very interesting to establish one, to be honest. Yeah.
Yes, I think it could work as a catalyst for sure.
Yeah, for sure, for sure.
Okay, is there any other question? Okay, if not, let's thank Konstantinos again.
Thank you all. Thank you so much.
Bye.